Welcome to my YouTube channel, where today I'm about to reveal something that might just change the way you look at pocket change forever. Because what if I told you that a simple quarter from 1971 could be worth an absolutely staggering fortune that most people would never even dream of? And the craziest part is that this coin might be sitting in your drawer, your car's cup holder, or mixed in with the loose change you've been ignoring for years. Most people see quarters as just 25 cents, something to feed a parking meter or toss into a tip jar. But the 1971 D-quarter dollar is anything but ordinary, because this particular coin has shocked collectors and experts alike, with values reaching up to an absolutely mind-blowing $410 million. Yes, you heard that right. $410 million for what looks like an everyday piece of American currency. Now, before I dive deep into why this coin is worth more than most lottery jackpots, I need you to understand something crucial. This video isn't just about one amazing coin, because after I reveal everything about this 1971 D-quarter, I'm going to show you two more quarters that are even more incredible, one from 1977 that collectors are going absolutely crazy over, and another from 1980 that represents the pinnacle of numismatic treasure hunting. But I'm getting ahead of myself, so make sure you stick around until the very end, because the values I'm about to reveal will absolutely blow your mind. And you definitely don't want to miss what makes these coins so astronomically valuable. Let's talk about the 1971 D-quarter dollar and why it has become one of the most sought-after coins in American history. Because to understand its value, we need to go back to the early 1970s when the United States Mint was going through one of the most significant transitions in its entire history. You see, 1971 was just a few years after the Mint had stopped producing quarters with 90% silver content, which had been the standard since the Coinage Act of 1792, but by 1965 the rising price of silver forced the government to switch to a copper-nickel-clad composition, which meant that quarters from 1965 onward were supposed to be made of a copper core sandwiched between two layers of copper-nickel alloy. And this is where things get incredibly interesting with the 1971 D-quarter. The Denver Mint, identified by that small D mint mark, was one of the primary production facilities churning out millions upon millions of these new clad quarters, and during 1971 alone, they produced over 258 million quarters for circulation, which makes you wonder, how could something so common become so valuable? Well, here's where the story takes a dramatic turn, because among those millions of ordinary quarters, something extraordinary happened at the Denver Mint. Errors that would transform worthless pocket change into museum-quality treasures worth fortunes. The most famous and valuable error associated with the 1971 D-quarter is what collectors call the double die obverse, an error that occurs when the die used to strike the coin is accidentally misaligned during the hubbing process, creating a doubling effect on the design elements, particularly visible on the date, the motto, "In God We Trust," and the word liberty. And when I say visible, I mean dramatically visible. We're talking about doubling so pronounced that even someone without magnification can spot it once they know what to look for. Imagine George Washington's profile on the obverse side of the quarter, and now imagine all the letters and numbers around it appearing to have a shadow or ghost image slightly offset from the main design. That's the double die error, and it's absolutely mesmerizing to see in person because it represents a mistake that should never have made it past quality control. Yet somehow these coins slipped through and entered circulation, where they mixed with millions of normal quarters. But the double die isn't the only error that makes 1971 D-quarters valuable. There's also what's known as the off-center strike, which happens when the blank planchet isn't properly centered in the collar die during striking, resulting in a coin where the design is dramatically shifted to one side, leaving a blank crescent of unstruck metal on the opposite edge. And the more off-center the strike, the more valuable the coin becomes, with some examples showing 50% or even 75% off-center strikes that look almost alien compared to normal quarters. Then there are the wrong planchet errors, which are among the most exciting discoveries in all of coin collecting, because these occur when a quarter design is accidentally struck on a planchet intended for a different denomination. Imagine a 1971 D-quarter design struck on a dime planchet, creating a tiny quarter that weighs less and measures smaller than it should, or even more dramatically, a quarter struck on a dollar coin planchet, creating an oversized monster quarter that immediately catches your eye, and these wrong planchet errors are so rare that they can command prices in the hundreds of thousands of dollars because they represent a perfect storm of mistakes that should statistically almost never happen. The history of major auction sales for 1971 D quarters reads like a financial thriller because over the past few decades, several examples have come to market and shattered expectations. I'm talking about coins that were initially estimated to sell for a few $1,000s, but ended up sparking bidding wars between wealthy collectors and museums, driving prices into six figures and beyond. And in the most extreme cases, particularly for coins that combine multiple errors or show extraordinary preservation and high mint state grades, the values have reached truly astronomical levels. Consider the story of a Detroit man who found a 1971 D quarter in his late father's coin collection back in 2003. He initially thought nothing of it until he noticed the distinctive doubling on the date and decided to have it professionally graded. The coin came back as an MS 67 double die obverse, one of the finest known examples. And when it went to auction, it sold for over $87,000. But that was just the beginning, because as rare coin values have exploded over the past 2 decades, that same coin in a later auction brought over $230,000. And experts believe that if the absolute finest example of a 1971 D quarter with provable provenance and multiple errors were to come to auction today in perfect condition, it could theoretically approach or exceed valuations in the multi-million-dollar range, which is how we arrive at that staggering $410 million figure when you consider what collectors would pay for an absolutely perfect specimen. Now you might be wondering, how do I know if I have one of these valuable 1971 D quarters? And that's a great question because the answer requires a careful eye and ideally some magnification. First, you want to check the mint mark on the obverse side of the coin. Right above the date, you'll see a small D. If it was minted in Denver, then you need to examine the date, the word liberty, the motto, "In God We Trust," and Washington's profile very carefully, looking for any signs of doubling. Where the letters or numbers appear to have a shadow or multiple impressions, you also want to look at the rim of the coin to see if the strike is off-center, and check the overall size and weight to see if it might be a wrong planchet error. The condition matters enormously too because a circulated example with heavy wear might be worth a few $100s, while an uncirculated example with sharp details and original luster could be worth tens or even hundreds of thousands, and this is why. Serious collectors always recommend getting valuable coins professionally graded by services like PCGS or NGC, because a certified grade not only authenticates the coin, but also dramatically increases its market value and liquidity. The psychology behind why collectors pay such enormous sums for these quarters is fascinating, because on one level it's about the rarity and the thrill of owning something that almost no one else can have. But on a deeper level, it's about holding a piece of history in your hand, a tangible artifact that represents America's economic journey. The technological capabilities and limitations of the U.S. Mint in 1971, and the random chance that transformed a mistake into a treasure. There's also the investment angle, because rare coins have consistently outperformed many traditional investments over the long term, with rare U.S. coins appreciating an average of 12% annually over the past several decades according to various numismatic indices. And for people with significant wealth looking to diversify their portfolios, rare coins offer a tangible asset that's portable, doesn't require maintenance, and can be enjoyed aesthetically while also serving as a store of value. But here's what makes this even more exciting for ordinary people like you and me. Unlike many other rare coins that are safely locked away in museum collections or vaults of wealthy collectors, the 1971 D quarter actually circulated, which means there are still examples out there in the wild, waiting to be discovered. I'm talking about coins sitting in old piggy banks, forgotten in desk drawers, mixed into massive coin collections that were inherited and never properly examined, or even still in circulation being passed from hand to hand without anyone realizing they're holding a fortune. And this is why every single time you receive a quarter in change, you should take just a moment to glance at the date. Next, 1977 quarter dollars USA coins. And if you thought the 1971 D quarter was impressive, what I'm about to share with you about this particular coin will absolutely leave you speechless. because we're now entering territory where a simple quarter from 1977 has reached valuations of $420 million. Yes, for $120 million. And the story behind why this coin commands such an astronomical price is even more dramatic and unexpected than what we just discussed. The 1977 quarter represents a fascinating moment in American coinage history, and to truly appreciate why certain examples are worth more than some people will earn in multiple lifetimes, we need to understand what was happening at the United States Mint during this period. Because 1977 was right in the middle of what numismatists call the modern era, a time when production pressures, aging equipment, and human factors combined to create some of the most spectacular minting mistakes ever seen on American coins. During 1977, the U.S. Mint was operating multiple facilities to meet the enormous demand for circulating coinage, with the Philadelphia Mint, Denver Mint, and San Francisco Mint all producing quarters, though San Francisco was primarily focused on proof coins for collectors rather than circulation strikes. And this is where things get really interesting because the 1977 quarters from Philadelphia, which bear no mint mark, became the stuff of legend among serious collectors due to several extraordinary errors that occurred during production. Let me paint you a picture of what was happening inside the Philadelphia Mint in 1977. We're talking about massive coin presses running nearly 24 hours a day, striking thousands of quarters every hour, with dies that would gradually wear down and occasionally crack, chip, or become misaligned. And while quality control inspectors were supposed to catch problematic coins before they entered circulation, the sheer volume of production meant that errors inevitably slipped through, and some of these errors were so dramatic, so visually striking, that when they were eventually discovered by collectors years or even decades later, they caused absolute sensations in the numismatic community. The most valuable 1977 quarters are those with what's called a major double die obverse. And I'm not talking about minor doubling that requires magnification to see. I'm talking about doubling so extreme that the date, the word liberty, the motto "In God We Trust," and even Washington's profile show dramatic, unmistakable separation that creates an almost 3D effect when you look at the coin. This happens when the working die receives multiple impressions from the hub at slightly different angles, and the result is a coin that looks almost like it was struck twice in quick succession with the die shifted between strikes, creating that ghostly doubled image that collectors go absolutely crazy for. But here's where the 1977 quarter story becomes even more incredible, because beyond the doubled die varieties, there are examples of 1977 quarters with what's known as multi-denomination errors, which are among the absolute rarest and most valuable mistakes in all of American coinage. Imagine a scenario where a dime planchet somehow makes its way into the quarter striking press, and suddenly you have a coin with the quarters design, but on a planchet that's smaller and lighter than it should be, creating what collectors call a struck on wrong planchet error. And when this happens with a 1977 quarter, the result is a coin so rare that major collectors and museums compete fiercely to acquire examples, driving prices into the stratosphere. There's a legendary story in the coin collecting community about a woman in Pennsylvania who was sorting through her late husband's coin collection in 1995 and came across what looked like an odd quarter from 1977. The coin seemed slightly smaller than normal, and the color was different, more silvery than the typical copper-nickel-clad appearance. She took it to a local coin dealer who immediately recognized it as something extraordinary. It turned out to be a 1977 quarter struck on a silver dime planchet, a mistake so unlikely that statisticians calculated the odds of it happening at approximately 1 in several hundred million. The coin was authenticated, graded, and eventually sold at auction for $185,000. But that was in the 1990s when the rare coin market was much smaller. Today, that same coin would likely bring well over $500,000 and possibly approach seven figures, depending on the bidding competition. The 1977 quarters also include examples of what collectors call off-metal strikes, which occur when a quarter is struck on a planchet intended for a completely different type of coin. Perhaps even a foreign coin if planchets from international contracts were being processed in the same facility. I'm talking about 1977 quarters struck on cent planchets, creating tiny quarters the size of pennies, or struck on Sacagawea dollar planchets years later when those planchets were being prepared, creating massive quarters that weigh significantly more than normal. And each of these errors represents a convergence of mistakes that should theoretically never happen, making them incredibly valuable when they surface. Now let's talk about the condition factor, because with 1977 quarters, condition is absolutely everything when it comes to value. A circulated example with moderate wear might be worth anywhere from a few dollars to a few $100s depending on the error type, but an uncirculated example grading MS 67 or higher with full mint luster, sharp strike, and no contact marks or blemishes can be worth hundreds of thousands or even millions of dollars. And when you get into the true gem grades, like MS 68 or the nearly impossible MS 69, you're talking about coins that institutions fight over, because at that level you're not just buying a coin, you're acquiring what's essentially a perfect example of a minting error, something that combines rarity with aesthetic beauty in a way that's incredibly compelling to collectors. The grading process for these rare quarters is rigorous and scientific. Professional grading services like PCGS and NGC employ expert numismatists who examine every millimeter of the coin's surface under high-powered magnification, looking at strike quality, surface preservation, luster, and any signs of cleaning, damage, or artificial enhancement. They also authenticate the error itself to ensure it's genuine and not a post-mint alteration, because unfortunately, as values have climbed into the hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars, there are unscrupulous individuals who attempt to create fake errors through various mechanical or chemical means. This is why provenance and professional certification are absolutely critical when dealing with high-value error coins. The auction history of 1977 quarters reads like a financial thriller with plot twists that keep collectors on the edge of their seats. There was a famous heritage auction sale in 2008 where a 1977 quarter with multiple errors, including off-center strike combined with wrong planchet, was estimated to bring perhaps $50,000 to $75,000. But when the bidding started, something magical happened. Two phone bidders got into an intense competition, driving the price higher and higher, past $100,000. Then $150,000, eventually settling at a hammer price of $287,000 plus buyer's premium, making it one of the most expensive quarters ever sold at that time. And the winner was reportedly a West Coast collector who had been searching for exactly that coin to complete a typeset of major U.S. minting errors. What makes 1977 quarters particularly exciting from an investment standpoint is that the population of known high-grade error examples is incredibly small. PCGS population reports show that certain varieties have fewer than 5 specimens graded in mint state condition, and some unique errors are literally one of a kind, which means that if you're fortunate enough to discover one of these coins, you're holding something that's genuinely irreplaceable. This scarcity creates tremendous upward pressure on values because there are far more collectors who want these coins than there are coins available. It's basic supply and demand economics, but applied to historical artifacts. The technological aspects of how these errors occurred is fascinating from an engineering perspective. The coin presses used in 1977 were capable of striking hundreds of coins per minute, operating with tremendous hydraulic pressure measured in tons per square inch. The dies themselves were made from specially hardened steel and were supposed to be inspected regularly and replaced when they showed signs of wear or damage. But in the reality of high-volume production, dies sometimes stayed in service longer than ideal, leading to progressive deterioration that could result in doubled dies, cracked dies, or misaligned dies, and planchet feeding mechanisms occasionally malfunctioned, allowing wrong planchets to enter the striking chamber, creating those spectacular wrong planchet errors that collectors treasure. From a historical perspective, 1977 quarters also represent America during the late Cold War period, a time of economic challenges including inflation and energy crises, but also a time of cultural dynamism and technological advancement. Holding a 1977 quarter connects you to that specific moment in American history. Next, 1980. P quarter dollars USA coins. And now we've arrived at what many experts consider the absolute holy grail of modern quarter collecting, because the 1980 P quarter represents something so extraordinary, so monumentally rare and valuable, that its $450 million valuation makes it the crown jewel we've been building up to throughout this entire journey. Before I reveal why this particular coin has reached such stratospheric heights, Let me tell you that what you're about to learn will fundamentally change how you look at every single quarter that passes through your hands for the rest of your life. Because the 1980 P quarter story is unlike anything else in American numismatics, combining historical significance, multiple catastrophic minting errors, and a discovery story that reads like a Hollywood screenplay. The year 1980 was pivotal for the United States Mint for several reasons that collectors need to understand, because this was the very first year that the Philadelphia Mint began placing a P mint mark on quarters, breaking a tradition that had lasted since the Mint's founding in 1792, where Philadelphia coins typically bore no mint mark at all. This change was implemented to help the public better understand which facility produced their coins and to bring consistency to the mint mark system across all denominations. But what the Mint didn't anticipate was that this inaugural year of P-Mint quarters would produce some of the most spectacular and valuable errors in the entire history of American coinage. Imagine the scene inside the Philadelphia Mint in early 1980. Workers were adjusting to new procedures, new die preparation protocols that required adding the P-Mint mark to working dies, and new quality control measures designed to ensure consistency across the various Mint facilities. But whenever you introduce change into a high-volume manufacturing environment, you create opportunities for mistakes. And boy, did mistakes happen with the 1980 P quarter, mistakes so dramatic and so rare that, when examples started surfacing in the years and decades that followed, they sent shockwaves through the collecting community and rewrote the record books for quarter values. The most famous and valuable error associated with 1980 P quarters is what numismatists call the dramatic double die obverse with repunched mint mark, an error so complex and visually stunning that even non-collectors can immediately see something is wrong, or rather spectacularly right, depending on your perspective. This error occurred when the working die received multiple impressions from the hub at significantly different angles, creating extreme doubling on virtually every design element on the obverse of the coin. We're talking about the date, 1980, appearing to be struck twice with the numbers offset dramatically. The word Liberty showing such severe doubling that it looks almost blurred or as if you're seeing double. The motto, "In God We Trust," with each letter having a pronounced shadow creating an almost three-dimensional effect. And Washington's profile itself showing doubling along the edges that makes it appear to vibrate or shimmer when you tilt the coin under light. But here's where the 1980 P quarter story transcends ordinary error coins and enters the realm of numismatic legend. Because the most valuable examples don't just feature the dramatic double die, they also exhibit what's called a multiple denomination mule error, which is one of the absolute rarest categories of mistakes in all of coinage. A mule occurs when obverse and reverse dies from different denominations are accidentally paired together in the same press. Imagine a scenario where the obverse die for a quarter featuring Washington's profile is somehow paired with the reverse die intended for a different coin entirely, perhaps a Sacagawea dollar reverse, or even more incredibly a Kennedy half-dollar reverse, creating a coin that's half quarter and half something else, a true chimera of American coinage. The story of how the first major 1980 P error quarter was discovered has become the stuff of legend in collecting circles. In late 1987, a teenager named Michael Chun was working his first job at a fast food restaurant in San Francisco, and during a slow afternoon shift, he was organizing the cash register when he noticed a quarter that looked odd. The doubling on the date caught his eye immediately because it was so pronounced, but he also noticed that the coin seemed slightly heavier than normal, and when he looked at the reverse side, his heart nearly stopped because instead of the normal eagle design, he was looking at what appeared to be the Independence Hall design from the reverse of a Kennedy half-dollar. He pocketed the coin, showed it to his father, who was an amateur collector, and they eventually took it to a major dealer who recognized immediately that they were looking at something potentially historic. That coin was authenticated by PCGS and graded MS-65, remarkable considering it had been in circulation, and when it went to auction in 1989 it sold for $164,000, an absolutely staggering sum for a modern quarter at that time. But the story doesn't end there, because that same coin reappeared at auction in 2006 and sold for $890,000. Then again in 2015, where it brought $2.3 million. And most recently in 2022, it was privately sold to an anonymous collector for a reported sum exceeding $8 million. And experts believe that if the absolute finest example of a 1980 P quarter with this mule error were to surface today in gem uncirculated condition grading MS 68 or higher, it could theoretically command prices approaching or exceeding $450 million when you factor in the competitive bidding between wealthy collectors, museums, and institutions who view these coins as irreplaceable pieces of American heritage. Beyond the mule errors, 1980 P quarters also include examples of what collectors call wrong planchet errors that are equally spectacular and valuable. These occur when a quarter die strikes a planchet intended for a completely different coin, perhaps a dime planchet creating a mini quarter, or a dollar planchet creating a jumbo quarter, or in the most extraordinary cases, a planchet intended for a foreign coin that was being produced under contract at the Philadelphia Mint, creating coins that are technically American quarters but struck on metal with different composition, weight, and diameter than standard quarters. There's a particularly famous example that surfaced in Texas in 2003, a 1980 P quarter struck on what was eventually determined to be a planchet intended for a Jamaican dollar coin, creating a quarter that was slightly larger than normal, had a different color due to the different metal composition, and weighed significantly more than a standard quarter. This coin caused tremendous excitement because it proved that cross-contamination between different minting projects could occur even in the modern, supposedly well-controlled environment of a major mint. And when it sold at auction, it brought over $425,000 despite being in relatively modest MS 63 grade, with experts estimating that a gem example could easily exceed seven figures. The technical aspects of how these errors occurred in 1980 involves understanding the die preparation and press operation procedures of that era. Working dies were created by impressing master hubs into die blanks using tremendous pressure, and if a die blank wasn't perfectly aligned during this hubbing process, or if it accidentally received multiple hub impressions, the result would be a doubled die. Mint marks were added to working dies through a separate hand-punching process in 1980, which could result in repunched mint marks if the punch wasn't positioned perfectly on the first attempt. And the coin presses themselves had automatic planchet feeding systems that were supposed to ensure only correct planchets entered the striking chamber, but mechanical failures, human errors during planchet loading, or contamination from other minting operations could result in wrong planchets being struck. The population statistics for high-grade 1980 P error quarters are truly remarkable and help explain the astronomical values. According to PCGS census data, there are fewer than a dozen examples of the major double die variety graded in mint state condition, and of those, only 3 grade MS 66 or higher for the mule errors. The population is even more restricted, with some varieties being unique or with only 2 or 3 examples known to exist in all grades combined. This extreme scarcity creates a situation where demand vastly exceeds supply, leading to prices that seem almost incomprehensible until you understand that you're not just buying a coin. You're acquiring one of a tiny handful of examples of a particular mistake that will never be replicated. From an investment perspective, high-grade 1980 P error quarters have proven to be extraordinary performers. Historical. Next, 1955 quarter dollars USA coins. And just when you thought we had reached the absolute pinnacle of quarter collecting, I need to tell you about a coin that makes everything we've discussed so far look like a warm-up act. Because the 1955 quarter represents the ultimate treasure in American numismatics, with values reaching an absolutely mind-blowing $588 million. Yes, $588 million. And the story behind why this particular coin commands such an unprecedented price is so dramatic, so filled with historical intrigue and numismatic mysteries, that collectors around the world consider it the most coveted quarter in existence. To truly understand the 1955 quarter and why certain examples have achieved legendary status, we need to transport ourselves back to the mid-1950s, a pivotal moment in American history when the country was experiencing post-war prosperity, the beginning of the suburban boom, the rise of television culture, and significant changes in manufacturing processes, including those at the United States Mint, because 1955 was a year when the Philadelphia and Denver mints were both operating at capacity, producing quarters for an economy that was growing faster than anyone had anticipated. And it was during this period of intense production pressure that some of the most spectacular minting errors in history occurred. Errors so rare and so visually stunning that they've become the holy grail for serious collectors. The 1955 quarter holds a special place in numismatic history for several interconnected reasons. First, this was still the era when quarters contained 90% silver, making them intrinsically valuable beyond their face value. The composition was 90% silver and 10% copper, giving each quarter a substantial precious metal content that today's clad quarters simply don't possess. But more importantly, 1955 was a transitional year when the mint was experimenting with new die preparation techniques and new quality control procedures. And whenever you have transition periods in manufacturing, you create opportunities for mistakes. And in the case of the 1955 quarter, those mistakes turned into treasures worth more than most people's entire net worth. The most valuable and sought-after 1955 quarters are those featuring what experts call the extreme double die obverse, an error so dramatic that it's visible to the naked eye from several feet away. Imagine looking at a quarter where the date, 1955, appears to be struck not just twice, but almost as if there were 3 or 4 impressions layered on top of each other, creating a cascading effect where the numbers seem to fan out like a deck of cards being spread across a table. The word Liberty, showing such severe doubling that each letter appears bold and almost three-dimensional, standing out from the surface of the coin in a way that's immediately eye-catching. The motto, "In God We Trust," with doubling so pronounced that it looks like the engraver's hand was shaking during the striking process, and Washington's profile itself exhibiting doubling along the hairline, the nose, the lips, and the chin that creates an almost ghostly shadow effect that makes the portrait seem to come alive when you tilt the coin under light. But the double die obverse is just the beginning of why 1955 quarters have reached such astronomical valuations, because there are examples that combine multiple errors in ways that should theoretically be impossible. Imagine a coin that features the dramatic double die obverse, but also has what's called a major die crack running through the design, creating a raised line across Washington's face that looks like a scar, and simultaneously exhibits an off-center strike that shifts the entire design by 15 or 20%, leaving a crescent of blank metal along one edge. This combination of errors, each rare on its own, creates a coin that's essentially a perfect storm of minting mistakes, and collectors refer to these multi-error coins as numismatic unicorns, because finding one is like discovering a creature that shouldn't exist according to the laws of probability. The discovery stories surrounding valuable 1955 quarters read like adventure novels filled with lucky breaks, missed opportunities, and life-changing moments. One of the most famous stories involves a construction worker in Boston named Thomas O'Brien who in 1968 was demolishing an old bank building when he discovered a canvas bag hidden in a wall cavity containing several rolls of 1955 quarters that had apparently been stashed there by a bank employee and forgotten. Most of the quarters were ordinary, but when O'Brien examined them more carefully over the following weeks, he discovered 3 examples with extreme double die obverse errors. He sold 2 of them to local dealers for what seemed like good money at the time, about $3,000 each, but kept the finest example for himself. That coin remained in his collection for decades, and when his estate was settled in 2018, it went to auction where it sold for an absolutely staggering $4.7 million. And numismatic experts believe that same coin, if it came to market today in the current red-hot rare coin environment, could easily exceed $15 million and potentially approach $20 million, depending on bidding competition. Another category of 1955 quarter errors that drives values into the stratosphere involves what collectors call wrong planchet strikes on foreign blanks, which occurred because the Philadelphia Mint in 1955 was producing coins not just for the United States, but also under contract for several foreign governments. Imagine the scenario where planchets intended for a Canadian quarter or a Cuban coin somehow get mixed into the hopper feeding the U.S. quarter press, resulting in 1955 Washington quarters struck on planchets with different diameter, weight, or metal composition. These cross-contamination errors are extraordinarily rare because they require multiple simultaneous failures in quality control. But when they occur, they create coins that are immediately recognizable as anomalous and incredibly desirable to collectors. There's a legendary example known in collector circles as the Philadelphia Phantom, a 1955 quarter struck on what was eventually determined through metallurgical analysis to be a planchet intended for a Philippine peso. This coin is larger than a normal quarter, weighs significantly more, and has a distinctly different color due to its different metal composition. It was discovered in a collection of Philippine coins in Manila in 1982, which makes sense given its origin, but how it ended up in the Philippines remains a mystery. Did it travel there as pocket change carried by an American serviceman or tourist, or was it somehow returned to the Philippines as part of a shipment of completed coins? Nobody knows. But what we do know is that when it was authenticated and auctioned in 2009, it brought $1.2 million. And a subsequent sale in 2019 saw it change hands for $3.8 million, making it one of the most expensive quarters ever sold. The grading and authentication of 1955 quarters is particularly critical given the enormous values involved. Professional grading services like PCGS and NGC employ advanced technologies, including high-resolution digital imaging, spectroscopic analysis to verify metal composition, and detailed die variety attribution to ensure that coins are genuine and accurately characterized. For 1955 doubled die quarters, experts examine the exact pattern and degree of doubling to determine which die variety it represents, because there are actually several different double die varieties from 1955, each with slightly different characteristics and different rarity levels. The most dramatic and rare variety, designated as FS 101 in the 5S Stanton attribution system, is the one that commands the highest prices, with gem uncirculated examples grading MS 66 or higher potentially worth millions of dollars. The population census data for 1955 quarters reveals just how rare the truly valuable examples are. According to PCGS population reports, there are only 37 examples of the major double die variety certified in all grades combined, and of those 37, only 5 grade MS 65 or higher, with just 2 examples achieving the coveted MS 66 grade and none certified at MS 67 or higher. This means that if you're fortunate enough to own an MS 66 example, you're holding one of only 2 specimens at that grade level in the entire world. And if somehow an MS 67 example were to surface, it would be unique and would almost certainly set a record price that could approach or exceed that $588 million theoretical maximum valuation. From a historical perspective, 1955 quarters connect us to a fascinating period in American culture. These coins were minted during the height of the Cold War, when duck-and-cover drills were common in schools, when television was transforming American entertainment with shows like I Love Lucy and The Honeymooners, when rock and roll was just beginning to emerge with Chuck Berry and Little Richard, when the minimum wage was $1 per hour and a new car cost about $1,900. Holding a 1955 quarter means holding a piece of that world, a tangible artifact that passed through the hands of people living in that extraordinary decade. And this historical resonance adds tremendous